Okay. All right. So we're just gonna wait. Welcome everyone. We're just gonna wait for people to trickle in. I can see some people are joining now. Simon just joined the call as well. No pressure. Andy and Ben. Okay, so there you go. Okay, a lot of people are joining. So let's just give them a minute or two to join, to get out of the waiting room. Okay. Okay, people are trickling in, so let's just give them a few minutes.
It's so good to see you all. Thanks for coming.
Okay, I think we'll just get started. So welcome everyone, and welcome to the sustainability track. And for this session, we have Andy and Ben, who's it's basically a tandem talk. So it's not gonna be one after the other. This is gonna be a really interesting interactive session, I guess, between the two of them first, and then we'll take questions at the end. So if you want to post your questions on the Q&A section, I'll be monitoring that, and I guess we can get started. I'm going to hand it over to Andy and Ben. And thanks everyone for joining us. Andy, Ben, over to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I think maybe we should do some introductions here first. So, Andy, would you like to get us started?
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Andie Nordgren. My current day job is at Unity Technologies. We make a game engine that is behind a lot of mobile games and also a lot of other games. And at Unity, I lead the teams that we have for all of our internal developer tooling and release processes, just developing, building, and releasing that game engine and testing it, which is an important part of our job, and also the release management and QA teams that are involved with getting this product to exist in the world. So really a great honor to get to work with those teams at Unity. And so that's where some of my thinking and examples today comes from. And before joining Unity in 2018, I was with CCP Games, which is a game company making EVE Online, which is a sci-fi MMO that's been live for a very long time. And code base wise has quite a lot of similarities with Unity in terms of being, one large monolithic code base with a lot of the challenges and fun times that come with that. So we've had quite some use for mapping in these environments, and we'll bring that to the table here today.
That's so awesome. And I know you've been mapping for quite a while behind the scenes, sometimes solo, sometimes with others. I'm really excited to hear about some of your experiences, especially with something as big as Eve, and being a VP and stuff like that is no small challenge. So I think it's really cool that you're here sharing your stories about mapping. My name is Ben Mosior, and I am here because I've been teaching people about Wardley mapping for a while. I think I first started mapping about 9 years ago, very feebly, I would say I barely made it. And then once I did kind of get over the top of the hill, I started sharing the tips and tricks that I discovered along the way. I created learnwardleymapping.com, and most recently, the thing I'm most proud of is called Strategy Tactics. It's from Pip Decks. It's a deck of cards, and it's really neat. I'm really proud of it. So we'll share some of those things during the session today as well. To kind of get us started here, and I would like to invite you to open up the chat down below in the Zoom, and I have a prompt for you just to kind of get a sense for where folks are at with their journey into mapping and so on. So I've got a little prompt in there. Where are you in terms of mapping? Is this the first time you've heard of it? probably not because you're here for Map Camp. Have you seen it but haven't tried it? Have you tried it? Have you used it regularly? And this is the first time when someone might actually answer this. Are you Simon Wardley? So there's a range of options here. Yes, there's a Simon Wardley in the room. Okay, all right. Life is good. I love the variety of folks here. We got a lot of 3s, a lot of 4s, and I really I love the 2.5. That's amazing. Andie and I have a plan for today, and we're gonna have a brief discussion to sort of set up the topic, and we're going to then share what we promised we'd share, lessons and tactics from the field, and we're gonna do some live mapping. We're gonna sort of preview what it looks like if you haven't had the chance to see how we do mapping and things like that. So, and then at the end we'll have some Q&A. So if there's at any point a question that you have on your mind, open up the Q&A at the bottom and type it in there, and we'll see if we can get around to it at the end. Sound good? All right. So Andie, we've made a promise. We promised that we would show people how to take Wardley maps to their organization. And we promised lessons and tactics from the field. Why do you care about this so much? I care about it a lot, and I know you care about it a lot, but we got together and we started talking and scheming for this talk, and we got spicy really fast. So I'm kind of curious, what's on your mind when it comes to this? You hear this topic, what comes to mind?
Well, so I care about it because when I encountered mapping, it started to be, so immediately transformatively useful for me in my practice, and like both sort of internally with running organizations, and then externally in terms of how to think about products and like what to make to be successful as a company and so on. And then, of course, I was like, oh my God, this is so useful. I want to bring it to my colleagues, right? I want us to map, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure that many of you who are here, if you're into mapping enough, or you have been convinced by someone enough to be here at Map Camp, you've probably had some of this feeling yourself, or at least talked to someone who had it to the point that they brought you here. And so, but then you kind of run into the wall of essentially cognitive overload for people, that there is this real challenge to get people to, because there's so much to mapping, and you can try to simplify it, but it becomes a long theory lesson. And it's been interesting to, Simon has now like, 10 years of, or almost longer, but many takes on how to explain the point of mapping, whether it starts in what's a map, or like what are the parts to start with. And we have all of these attempts, Mark is generating podcasts with AI to give you any flavor of explanation that you could possibly want. And I still sending even simplified explanations, like my experience has been, that it's just too much to take in. So this is what I've been curious about, and I then assume that other people have the same challenge. It's a really tall ask for people to essentially go read a pretty long book to then start applying this method. And the busyness mountain is really tall with this stuff. So that's why I kind of care about this and wanted to have this discussion and start to talk and share, like, what can you actually do out there? Because I've done some stuff, right? and let's try to give some of these tactics away to others.
Yeah, because once you kind of crack open how simple it can be, and how it doesn't take full theory dumps to get others playing with you and exploring this space, suddenly this whole world opens up to you of collaboration and working together on mapping, like, yes, making maps sometimes, but also sometimes using mapping thinking behind the scenes. And part of what I think about a little bit is I think there's an essay by Venkatesh Rao called "Don't Build a Hill to Die On." And it's this thing that we all do when we have our favorite method. It's like, I want to bring this to you all. And then we try to bring it to everybody, and everyone's like, no, no, thank you. I'm busy. That's a little bit too much. You seem to like it a lot. I'm happy for you, but I'm over here. I'm doing my thing. And I think there's like a really simple, like caloric reason for why people are like that. It just takes so much energy. And I'm thinking on like Kat's talk from earlier today, like we're overwhelmed, we're exhausted. We are already tapped out. Our attention has been maxed. And to quote various consultants over the years, attention is the limited thing, regardless of what context you're working in. So I'm thinking like we dangle this idea like, hey, Wardley mapping, it's really cool. Come try it out with me. That's one of hundreds of things they've run into that day alone that is vying for their attention. And if the instant they try it on, it just saps the energy out of them because they have to do a heavy lift up front, picking up all that theory, making sense of it, learning new jargon. They just get tired and they tap out, especially if you manage to get them into a conference room for like 4 hours and they're like, I'm done now. Okay. So that's a challenge, and I don't think it has to be that way. Maybe like one question I want to ask you, Andie, is like there are many methods out there, thousands of methods about various things, right? And we like this one. But why does it matter so much? Like why do we even care to help people on this journey?
I mean, for me, I don't really care in a sense to help people learn mapping. I care about the outcomes. I think I have just become allergic to meta over the years. Like there's a certain hygiene level of meta that you need. And by meta, I mean sort of process and how you do things and so on. But it's a tax of sorts. And I find that organizationally, it's unfortunately quite possible in large organizations, especially that are sort of already an institution with some momentum, some revenue, and some, it's already rolling. It's not trying to fight for survival in startup mode. Then in my experience, you can have teams or organizations that are at like, I don't know, more than half their bandwidth is like eaten by meta.
Yeah.
Like it's some sort of self-referential, like playbook-itis of sorts that I call it sometimes, where it's like our purpose is to follow the playbook. And it becomes more important than the substance of what you are actually doing. So now I'm always looking for ways to sort of just shed as much of the meta as possible. I mean, quite recently, I've been in extremely painful meetings where instead of talking about the substance of what we should be doing next year, we are talking about how to write good OKRs. And I just want to like vanish. Because
the urge
it's
to
so
disappear into the
costly,
walls.
right? Yeah. It's so costly, and that's why I'm so interested in this. It's like, what are ways that we can bring mapping as a methodology with as little meta as possible, and lead always not with the method, but with the substance of what we are actually doing. And what's challenging about that, of course, and why it's great that at a conference like this, that we get to see like actual people map actual stuff in their space, because that's when it's real and it comes to life and it becomes interesting that someone understood their value chain in more detail and better and so on. That's meaningful for them. But as we see in like the Scrum business, for example, like if you're going to be a consultant, all you can teach is the method. Like you can't, because you don't necessarily know the domain, right? And then you become focused on the method. But to be actually successful with any of these techniques, whether it's Scrum or Wordly mapping, the subject matter of the actual domain you're working in and the outcomes you're going after, they need to be like 95% of the bloody focus. So this is what I have kind of learned or try to go for, is that how do we start in our actual business problem challenge, like our actual stuff, and then
Yeah.
bring in some scaffolding that helps us talk about that in more productive ways.
I
And
think
Wardley
that's right
Map
on.
one of those.
Yeah. I like, obviously action without thinking is super problematic. However, when you're spending so much of your, so many of your cycles on trying to like pick up the book knowledge and play with it, that's where the theory versus practice problem is. Yeah, as a consultant, I can tell you how to map, can't help you actually get the outcomes. I can't make that happen for you. You have to do the work. So wouldn't it be great if we maybe rebalanced the skew a little bit and moved things a little bit more towards practice, a little bit less towards theory, even though we can see theory and it's right there and it's like we can pick it up and touch it. The practice stuff is harder, but let's go play in that difficult place. And that, I think, leads me to my next question, which will kind of round out our discussion here, is like, we wouldn't be here if we didn't think better ways were possible, right? So I want a glimpse of what you think we could have instead of this theory heavy version of work generally, and for Wardley mapping specifically. Like, paint me the picture of what you think is possible.
I mean, I think it is that rebalance, and you can't say, this is the problem, right? You can't say anything generic because it has to be led. If the what is possible is like 5% meta instead of like 60% meta, if you will. That's kind of my vision in a way, right? And I've always also seen this, that when you talk about the actual stuff, everything's so easy. Like, if you can create shared situational awareness about the actual things that matter, it's so obvious what you need to do usually. Like,
Yes.
the situation tells you what to do. And so if you can create that shared situational awareness, you have now, you like it just is just something very different that happens, because then subject matter experts who know the deep detail just come to the table with solutions without having to be framed or prompted or like, in some complicated dance of like specific workshops or whatever, right? It's like reality wins and reality sort of leads the way, but you have to see it together, because
Yeah.
without that shared situational awareness, you have sort of nothing. So a lot of the things that I do now are a lot about like, how do we create that shared situational awareness of our reality that matters for us?
It reminds me of what Kat Switell was saying about, she always like mentions Mary Parker Follett, and one of the things that Mary Parker Follett is known for saying is, like, let's not get caught up in the whole like giving and taking of orders. What if instead we could take orders from the situation? And
Yes.
that leads me to think mapping is a way to help others around you see the situation and then what to do. Like, at least, we're not being distracted by fantasies. We're now like within a set of options that are somewhat obvious, and we can have more nuanced discussions within that set. And it reminds me, I had a conversation with someone who was a director just last week, and all I did was sit down with her and hold the space for her to do the thinking, and we mapped together, and she came out the other end knowing exactly what to do. And that had nothing to do with me, and it had everything to do with the map that we made together. It was just obvious. So I want more of that for people, and I think it's possible, without the heavy lift. All right, I think it's time to maybe dive in. I'm really excited to do this with you, Andie. Thank you for taking the time and working with me on the prep here. And I'm really excited for all of you out there who are attending this to hear what we've been experiencing and also respond to it. So if something comes up for you, throw it in the chat and we'll kind of integrate that into the discussion. Ask questions in the Q&A in Zoom down below. We're excited for this to be a discussion, not just a broadcast. So with that, I'm going to get started here with some slides, if that's all right. And
All right.
Andie and I are both kind of, let me see if I can do this the right way. Presenter view. Hey, there we go. All right, Andie and I might have commentary for this at any point. So obviously, Andie, you can interrupt me at any point. I'm gonna keep track of time and make sure I'm not yammering too long. Anybody recognize that gentleman in the middle of the screen? I suppose maybe some of you do. This is my favorite picture of Simon Wardley, not least of which because I took it. This was at Map Camp Atlanta in 2019. Oh, we were babies back then. We were sweet summer children who had the whole world in front of us. We were hanging out at an aquarium talking about maps, and this is Simon in his element. This is just it's like being surrounded by people who want to learn. And so I love this picture, and I also love the story that Simon gets to tell every time he shares his talk. If you have not heard Simon tell his story, I think you should hear it. And so I just wanted to put out there, you can go to lwm.events/story and listen to Simon talk about how mapping came to be in his own words. If you missed the keynote or the update on mapping that Simon's given, this is a great way to kind of get connected with the story behind Wardley mapping. So I just wanted to share that here. The other thing I wanted to start with off the bat here is like the coolest thing about this is mapping is free. Like you can go read a book that Simon wrote for free and pick up these tools and do things with them and change the way your work works, change the outcomes that you're going to get. And it's all built around this story that Simon's told us. And you can go read this book. Simon's made Wardley mapping Creative Commons attribution share alike, which means anyone can pick it up and anyone can make it better as long as we give credit where credit's due. And I love Alex, what he says in the chat here. It's not free, it's a trap. Once you start mapping, you do see maps everywhere. You start thinking in terms of value chains and users and needs and evolution and all this stuff. It just becomes part of who you are. I love that intuition. Andie and I think both have had that experience. Like a situation comes up and we're already mapping in our heads, whether or not we're actually writing it down. I think the other cool thing is that maps are super powerful. They have real results. Lots of people use them and get benefits from them. And I think it's powerful because it helps you leverage all the perspectives in the room. So you don't just get that mono perspective of the loudest person or the person in charge. It helps you make notice and make hard choices instead of avoiding them. And maybe you'll do things right the first time instead of going off and building another Death Star, as Simon likes to say sometimes. And I think most importantly, it helps you learn from mistakes. So there's this kind of thing that Simon talks about where it's like pre-mortem, you make a map, call your shot, you take some action, and then post-mortem, you look back and you see what happened. What happened on our map? And that's how you learn. That's how you get better at the game, right? And I think even more powerfully for leaders, it helps you turn like those moments of confusion or aporia, if you want to get Kneven on it. Like just when you're in the situation, you're just disoriented. You don't know what to do. You can just completely change the way you're engaging with the situation by mapping. Not that you'll get the perfect answer, but you'll get a foothold. And so that can turn into conviction. Andie, have you ever have you experienced that moment like where it's like, what am I supposed to do? And you do some mapping with someone or like you do it for yourself and like conviction. I know what my game is here.
Yeah, we had a super clear situation like that I'll be sharing from a little bit later, but in this kind of big unwieldy operational maturity project, it was kind of not super clear what to do and where to start because we had so much stuff. And then once we started mapping, it just stood out from the situation. Like and decisions were just like I said before, they were just sort of flowing because it was so obvious. Right? It is exactly that shift, that beauty that happens. So
yeah. My favorite part is when you're just going along, you're mapping, everyone's like, okay, 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 and then boom, someone gets a eureka moment, their eyes light up, they're like, oh, it's either, oh, how are we this bad? We have to fix this. Or it's like, oh, there's an opportunity here, there's something we can get to. So I'm really always thinking about the conversations and what happens to get to that eureka moment where the situation just kind of like starts making sense again. And that leads to better action, I think, for sure. And measured in real world consequences too. Like I think we've all heard Simon's stories, and many of us have probably read the book. Simon talks about his time at Canonical and what they did with Ubuntu. But like we've heard over many of the map camps in years past of stories where someone made a map and had a couple important conversations as a result, and they saved lives. They made lives better. They prevented enormous waste by preventing the launch of like really big bad projects that should never have been started, right? Or frankly, avoiding the obvious mistakes that jump out at you when you just take a moment to look. And of course, yeah, revenue, fine, whatever. There's one problem though, and I think it's that Wardley Maps is hard, as we kind of alluded to before. There's a lot going on here, and if you show this slide to someone who's never seen mapping before, their head is going to explode. So, how do you handle that? I think is an interesting question. There's lots of information, lots of jargon. I mean, as there well should be, because it's a specialized kind of field. It's got lots of interesting things that are important to know. And unfortunately, like the experience a lot of people have is they try and fail and try and fail and try and fail and try and fail, and they either give up or they find a situation that's important enough to motivate them to keep going 100 times until finally their head bashes through the other side of the brick wall, right? That's my story. I'm going to share a little bit about that too. And then, of course, there's the problem, like, once you got a map, then what? Okay, I got this thing. What do I do with it? And, like, that kind of, like, misses some of the point. But, like, we can address that problem if we know it's there. And also, yeah, it's a fast track to rejection therapy. Because, like, you get excited and you share it with someone, and they're like, what is this? Go away. So, I was just going to share like a quick version of the story of how I got into mapping, and it all starts with this question: hey kid, you want to buy some servers? I was part of a 2-person team doing configuration management, which is like just making sure that software can ship at a company that needed that software to ship. And our job was kind of just like taking care of problems that came up, making sure systems were running. We had some on-site like servers, we had some off-site like SaaS stuff as well. And one day someone comes along and says, hey, we got some money. Do you want some money? You can only use it to buy servers, but we found it and you can have it if you want to buy servers. I was like, that's so cool. Never in the enterprise world is there ever a budget moment like this. We didn't ask for this money. It just popped up out of nowhere. So, and also like being a nerd, I loved the idea of getting to rack up some servers, like to get to order them and pick them out and unbox them and get them in the rack and then like get the network, like all cable management. Oh my gosh, like right up my alley. Some of you may understand this. But there was something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, like something that didn't quite feel right. And my partner at the time, my colleague, we were both thinking about this problem, like something doesn't seem right. And we thought, okay, what about this Wardley mapping thing? Like we keep hearing about it. It seems like the right tool for this situation. Like maybe we could use it for this. And well, we tried. And we tried and we tried and we tried and we tried, and we didn't want to get this wrong, so we kept trying. We kept booking conference rooms, getting in there for weeks on end, trying to figure this out, and we failed and failed and failed, and eventually we made a map, and it kind of looked like this. So at the very top, we've got our users, the people that are in our care, who they need their development pipeline to work. They need to be able to write code. They need to be able to build it and package it up and send it to customers and things like that. And like there's 1,000 other things that are happening there in the background. But roughly speaking, in order to make that all work, we had to make sure issue tracking worked so people could write tickets about things and talk about things they wanted to build and talk about issues. We needed a wiki so we could do documentation. We needed version control so that You know, we see how changes get made. So when something happens to the software and it starts behaving in ways we don't expect, we can go back and see what happened and figure it all out. All that needs to work. And guess what? All of it was self-hosted and customized in really bad ways, really scary ways. Like these systems were running on hand-carved bespoke servers in the data center that had like well, it looked like this. So that's a problem. And so that data center is a danger zone. And along comes this money, and we're like, oh, we could put this money towards the servers, more scary compute in the data center. Something doesn't seem right. And so what we realized as a part of making the map that we eventually made is that we had no strategy. Like we looked at all of these individual parts on the map, and we realized we have no attention for any of these parts. We're just vibing. We're just keeping them up and running. We're just like break fixing. Like if something goes down, we were just bumping it back up. When the power went out over the weekend, as it would, when there was no data center UPS, no power or generator or battery backup in the data center, we would have to go in the morning and hit the power button and start the systems back up so that the developers could do work. Ah, Andie has feelings about that, and you should too. So, like, should we invest further in this data center? Should we add compute to this? Should we burden ourselves for the next 5 years maintaining these systems that we're currently not responsible enough to be maintaining? How about no? So we did this instead. We looked at the situation. We said, we want to stay away from this data center as much as we can. We want to get rid of all of the servers that are hand carved and bespoke. And actually, why are we running our own issue tracking system? Why are we running our own wiki? Why are we running our own version control? There are SaaS providers that are much better than us at this. And maybe we won't be able to make that leap now, but we might be able to make that leap in the future. And you know what? It all starts with saying no to this money, right? We cut off that future of getting away from this data center if we say yes. So we found our conviction. We knew what we wanted. We started fighting for it. And of course, as a result of this lovely experience of finally like understanding what we wanted, you know, I wanted to share Wardley maps with the world, as Andie did, and you know, as you all probably did as well. And of course, like how do you go about sharing, you know, these kinds of things? Just to be clear, like the results were good. The results spoke for themselves. Everyone was happy with what happened. We'll talk more about how we got people to pick up that change and like run with it instead of fighting us on it. But it left me like wanting to share Wardley maps with the world. And so at first I did what you all do, right? I started parroting Simon. I started talking like Simon. I started like giving his talk, but like in my locale. And I don't know if you know this, but it's really hard to tell someone else's story. And also like Simon's just really good. Like he's so good, right? At speaking and getting people up. And then I tried just explaining the theory more quickly. Like, how can we get through that theory lift up front faster? Info dump, anyone? Andie, have you tried this? How's that info dump work out?
It doesn't really. I think I have a 5-minute version and it still doesn't work.
Yeah. Like we can condense the information and it still just like obliterates their sense of reality and they just kind of shut down. I tried explaining it more clearly using plainer language, and these things did help and more people got it than before. But eventually I had to start finding my own way. I had to start like seeking something that was different than what had already been there. And so I started looking for like this. I had this obsession with finding the algorithm of Wardley mapping. Like what are the steps to it? How do you understand it? And I even like made like a chat bot that would like walk you through it and build a map and all this fun stuff. I think the first thing that sort of like clicked was the Wardley mapping canvas, and people seemed to pick that up and use it. I started seeing it at Map Camp, and it was like this 6-step process, and it was all to help people have those conversations that they needed to have. And like it ended up in the Miro template library back when that was just barely starting out to be a thing. And then I started working on like courses, and I had this like version of minimum viable Wardley mapping. It was like 1 user, 1 need, 3 to 5 capabilities. Can you make a map out of that? And if you can make a map out of that, then you can expand from there and you can get everything that you need bit by bit expanding. And that also involved like realizing that the climate doctrine and leadership tables are really great inspiration for questions you can ask when you're mapping. Like you could just go through every single one of those and ask a question based on each of those things and find out whether or not it's relevant. I mean, that's the basic question, right? Is like, is this relevant? Is this relevant? Is this relevant? Is this pattern important here? Is this doctrinal principle important here? And like that just made the whole process make a lot more sense. And then like the thing that I'm most proud of is working with David Hall, my co-author, to build strategy tactics. We thought that maybe Wardley mapping was a pile of raw material out of which you could build tools. And I think we were right. And so we pulled from Wardley mapping, we pulled from transition design, and we designed strategy tactics from pip decks. And it includes things like, hey, how do you make a value chain? That's a thing that you should just like know how to do on its own. There are cards for exploring just user needs. Those are things you should understand just on your own. And we started finding these ways of accessing these tools and ideas with like simple ideas like, hey, a value chain is just who's, what's, and how's. Who's involved, like who gets value, what do they get, and how do they get it? It all fits together, right? And like if you want to make a Wardley map, you just slap on that x-axis, evolution. On the left, things are rare and risky, and you're lucky if it ever works. On the right, things are standard and boring, right? Where do those things go? Just push them to the left or push them to the right. And that worked for people. And so we made a bunch of other tools, and like there are a bunch more that we can talk about too. You're always welcome to talk about this stuff with us. And that seemed to be working. And it, as a result of all this work, like we're starting to see Wardley mapping pop up in many organizations. Like people like Andie are advocates, whether or not they're standing there with us with like a megaphone saying Wardley map, please. Like they're silently, secretly, at the right moment, like popping up an important tool and using it. I mean, don't let me speak for you. Is that your experience? Like, is that what you've seen as well? Like, because I think there are like thousands of you.
Yeah, at this point, probably. I still think I'm waiting to come across someone inside my own organization who knows about Wardley mapping that I didn't tell myself.
Yeah.
And so there I don't think we've crossed the chasm fully yet, but all of these efforts have made such a difference, and I think that now I'm at a place where I might be willing to send people to a resource like the strategy tactics deck or like learn Wordly mapping and so on, because it does lower the bar enough that we might have a more meaningful sort of mapping session. And that I've not felt those resources were there before. So I'm really grateful that they exist now, because they make it possible to think slightly more differently, to hide a little bit less, I think, is that.
Yeah. I love being able to like find people in a specific domain. Like, oh, you're an architect and you want to like learn about architect stuff with Wardley mapping.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go send you to like JD Carlston or Indu Alagarsame. Like I'm like, there are specific people now that we can have in mind that we can share these things with. And I love in the chat, there are literally dozens of us.
Yeah.
But I think that advocacy is growing, and you know, I personally taught a lot of events, and I've like put a lot of people through courses, and you know, learnwardleymapping.com has started to see like more than 60,000 people a year visit. And so I'm wondering, like, where are they hearing about it? What are like, those are interesting like questions to ask. And of course, with strategy tactics like this, it's basically a Trojan horse. It's a fancy looking, legitimate, right? Like, there's a legitimacy of like projecting legitimacy is a lot of this game, I think. And so now like those tools are sort of like out there, and they're waiting for people to pick them up and play with them in these enterprise organizations and these small medium businesses and these governments. And I think that's what's really interesting, is what's going to be coming next. So okay, well, you know, I predicted it. talked a little bit too much. So Andie, forgive me. Everyone else, forgive me. I want to like do a little call to arms before we follow through on our promise and give you some tips and tricks. I think the work here is just beginning. And I think that because Wardley mapping is still early in its adoption and early in its development, there's a lot of work to be done to make it more certain, to make it more common. So pushing it to the right, in terms of evolution. And to be a little bit foolishly optimistic, I think the reason Wardley mapping is important is because it helps people become intentional about their systems. And I'm a silly, like, angry optimist because I think if people are intentional, they'll mostly do good, right? And maybe these giant corporate behemoths will either become a little bit better, or maybe you'll withdraw your support and go do something else, right? So I think there's something interesting about how it enables you to have new capabilities and make things better and more intentional. I want to bring about more good in the world. I want to see that, and that's going to be up to you. And I think Wardley mapping is one of the best ways to do that. So full stop, the work is just beginning. We need you in order for this to be effective. And that's why we want to share these lessons from the field, because we want to equip you with tools, things that seem to have worked in the past, so that you can go lead the charge and in your local area make things just a little bit better. Because goodness, the world needs more of that, I think. All right, couple tools, tips, tricks, ways to bring Wardley mapping to your organization. Andie, what do you think about this one?
Oh, that's what I do.
I think a lot of folks are coping by using this method because, you can only get socially rejected so many times before you go, I think I'm going to learn from this and stop talking about the thing that people don't want to hear from me. I wrote a blog post called Nobody Cares About Your Precious Framework. You can Google it if you want to read it. But a long time ago, I was like, you got to stop trying to make them care. I think instead, it's more useful to take higher quality action, like use mapping, get good at taking good quality action. And I think that could attract people in. That's one way. It's not the only way, but I think if you're always making the really interestingly good decisions, I want to know about that. I want to learn more about that. I don't know. Is that folly, you think, Andie, or like maybe it's a little too much of the optimism? But what's your experience been on this?
I mean, I think it's just, again, to the previous conversation, remembering that the goal is not to teach people about Wardley mapping. It's just like Wardley mapping is a tool to achieve real things in the real world in whatever context that you're in. And that if you start to map that, then you actually realize quite quickly that the important dependencies are not really the knowledge about mapping, but rather the knowledge about the situation and the situational awareness. So that kind of tells you to begin with that that mapping itself should not be the focus. And I think this, to be fair, applies to every other type of method as well. This kind of meta allergy, whether it's Scrum or jobs to be done or design sprints or design thinking or whatever it is, right? It's like if it obscures the substance, it's taking up too much space.
Well said. Like, I want to clip that and post it on YouTube, like, and just broadcast it everywhere. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, and this leads me to this. Like, look, I'm gonna say these in very blunt, like, principle style ways. Like, always this, never that. You're welcome to disagree. Of course, situations for you and then with the way that you want to interact with the world might be different. But I don't think we should be info dumping theory. I think like the folks who are really into that can go read the book and they'll take to it like a duck to water. And if we want more intention in the world, I think we should instead use the theory that we know to make the people around us better. And I think the best way to do that is to ask better questions. So one of the things I like to think is like never let a meeting go to waste. Like even if you're in the meta meeting, right? Never let it go to waste. Ask one good question. And I think there are lots of interesting and important questions to ask when you're operating in this kind of like stealth mode. Like it's not complicated. Like really, like if you just draw attention to a couple of these, like, hey, so who's this for? Boom. Question, like the whole conversation redirected. Because very quickly you'll find that there's disagreement there. And actually, I think it's really important to embrace these fundamental questions before you start worrying about specific solutions or even like diagnosing the problems that are going on. So you can go all the way through the strategy cycle and find questions like these and ask them without talking about worthy mapping, and people will respond, and you'll have changed the conversation entirely.
And I think there's very often like super high value in writing these things down outside the context of a map, because in my experience, maps get really complicated really fast as soon as you have more than one type of user.
Yep.
And almost every worthwhile business situation or other situation, you have more than one type of user. And then like trying to do them all at the same time just gets so messy so
Yeah.
quickly that
Yep.
just putting this on paper like outside and then making it a dimension kind of later, or just having workspace to put it somewhere that is not inside the map, really helps when you do then map or kind of make the value chain visible and reason around it. You can then make multiple maps because you have agreed that we have these 3 user types, and then you can go into the detail of each type, but you're all still on the same planet with, and remembering that you have those other 2 user types, right? And then you can overlay later, for example.
Yeah. I love that too, because like in MapKeep, which is one of the tools that I really like, especially for solo mapping, and I'm learning how to use it for collaborative stuff too. There are layers, and so you can like hide all the stuff that is irrelevant to the conversation that is happening right now, and you can kind of put on the horse blinders a little bit to help people focus like just on this sliver of it, because otherwise, yeah, exactly like you said, people get lost. They sort of explode and run away. I have this one, and I think it's related to what you were sharing. It's like when you're mapping together, I think partial success is way better than complete failure. And I think that means that you have to treat mapping like it's not an all or nothing thing. Like it's actually really great if you only focus on one of those users. Yes, it's a complicated situation. There are 10 different users. Yeah, you got to pay attention to all their needs eventually. Start with one. Please don't do all of them all at once. You will get lost and then you will get stuck. So don't make it all or nothing. You don't need it all at once. I like this slide from way back. Forget all the other stuff until you can do some of the smaller things, right? Until you're like walking into every meeting with a clear idea of who the users are and what their needs are. Like skip the rest. And then add the next thing in once you're consistently doing these things. So I think that's in the spirit of what you were just describing, Andie. In my silly oversimplified world, I think that worthy mapping in a nutshell is just drawing pictures and then having questions to ask about them. Somebody can probably throw a shoe at me. That would be okay. And I think like there are skill levels, or there are more basic things or more intermediate or advanced things you can do for drawing the pictures or for asking the questions. Basic pictures might just look like lists. We throw some users up at the top, some components down below. Or maybe we'll do like the simplified version of evolution where we just like you treat it as a sorting exercise. It's just buckets of things. That's okay. Yeah, and like maybe you'll make a small map. Small maps are cool. I like small maps. Maybe later you'll make a big map. Big maps are cool. Like if you can deal with it, right? Like if you can take it in, if you made it, or if the people in the room who made it can all like participate in it. So yeah, I like all of this energy for you. Pick and choose whatever seems best for the moment. Okay, I got this one. And I think we've only got 2 or 3 more of these left, and then we'll do some demoing and showing and tell. When mapping with others, I think it's most important, and this is what I learned like in 2019, running a lot of events, and then the pandemic hits and I'm running more remote events. Prioritize in this order: the energy of the room, like the energy of the people in the room, making good use of the time, and then the objectives. So in that order, the key thing here is like when you're inviting other people to map with you, the most important thing is that you don't drain their energy. You have to keep them engaged and getting a lot of value from it. And that means no theory dumping. That means doing stuff that's hard to a minimum for beginners, right? Do stuff that's easy. That's why we talk about proximate objectives from Richard Remelt and all this stuff. Do something that people can easily meet and exceed, right? And don't put them in a position where they're asking you, why are you making me do this, right? Make it easy, make it fun, make it energy restoring, right? Everything that they do in that session should bring them some energy. And then if you can keep energy levels high enough and you fail at making good use of time and you fail at meeting the objectives, hey, at least they had a good time. They'll probably give you another shot, right? And then later you can get better at making good use of time in addition to keeping good energy. And yeah, of course they're going to give you another shot because we're getting close. We can see the objectives. We're going to get to them. And then you get the trifecta, right? You get the good use of energy, good use of time, and you met your objectives. You actually mapped something that mattered. You got an outcome from it. Now you know what to do. And I think that's how you have to approach these things. Any thoughts on that, Andie? Anything I missed here that you would point at? Cool. Any tool will do. I wouldn't get too obsessed with what tool you're using. I like with the right practices, you can use any tool. Whiteboard, PowerPoint, Google Slides, Miro, MapKeep, online Wardley maps, Figma, name it, YED, that's an old one. Like whatever you got, if you can make maps in it, you can use it. And a lot of it has to do with like what practices you follow. So screen sharing is really good. We're developing some new practices that we're putting under the sort of label of strategy teaming, things that kind of like riff on mob programming or software teaming. So if you want to learn more about that, there's an ebook to go check out. But we think like Wardley mapping is a form of strategy teaming. So it's like how you get people in a room to collaborate in the moment to work on a problem. There's a lot to learn there. We like using like roles, like there's a navigator, someone who's like leading the discussion. There's like the crew who's like answering questions, things like that. And then there's like the mapper who's recording it all and making sure that what they write down is what people expected, right? And that you get a good like distributed consensus with that kind of idea about how things work. One tip that I love, and this is the second to last one, is sharing. Y'all need to be making more voice memos and videos and sharing those and like keeping them short, but like just summarizing what y'all just did. I don't know why I'm saying y'all. I'm in Pittsburgh, so we say yins. So summarizing whatever yins did, right? What happened? What did you learn in that session together? What do you want to try next? Just talk through the map. Like the user is this, they need that. That depends on these components. We think this component is custom build. We think that component is commodity. Just talk through it and say, like, I think the pain is here, not there. Just to sum it all up for someone who wasn't there and also to remind the people who were. I think this is underutilized. I love this as a little technique. Have you ever tried this, Andie? It's like a lot of fun. And I think people get a lot out of it, but
yeah, that's interesting. It's probably true, but it's interesting because I'll when I share, I realize that I never do live sessions of mapping with people. I find ways to do it asynchronously, and so that's what I'm going to do now.
I'm going to double down on that and say that you can actually run any full workshop process asynchronously. And if you ever want to talk about that, like we should connect and explore that more, because I think you can map asynchronously as well. And it's just through those questions. Hey, who do you think is the users? Okay, I'll put that on a map. Right? And then you just like sum it up with like a voice memo or something like that. Okay. The last thing that I want to kind of like leave us, and so we can do a little bit of talking and demoing, is to translate the maps and the mapping into language that the organization understands. in my story where I talked about deciding not to take the money, I had to convince people to care. And so I had to put it into a report. And what I did with the report is I just turned the map into words that described the situation, and then turned those words into arguments that said we should do this and not that, and here's why. And like, yeah, this is up to you, how, depending on how adventurous you're feeling. I put the map in the appendix out of the hope that someone would be interested in it. And they were not, just to be very clear. However, they didn't argue with me. They didn't argue with us about our logic, because they were just operating on vibes, and we came with a whole argument with like rationale that we came up with from the maps. So like we did the work, and they just, you know, they weren't going to bother because they didn't want to do the work. And so our conclusion ended up being the default, which I thought was really interesting. Any experiences like that, Andie?
Yeah, not necessarily reports, but yeah, reframing, just taking the insights that the situation told us. It's usually, once it's become obvious, it's usually really easy to frame in just a few sentences what the outcomes are. Like, because of blah, we need to do X, and it's just, you know. Because it's a business critical dependency for us to produce any working build of our software, we need to continue funding our specialized test farm, you know, like,
Who knew?
Yeah, no, and that's
that makes
after,
sense.
You know,
That seems right.
Yeah, no, and that's after answering, you know, a lot of people going, why can't we just do this in the cloud? And of course, after dealing with mapping and, you know, the whole, like, you know, why you usually shouldn't have your own data center, we actually have real reasons to have our own data center, because you cannot spin up a VR headset in the cloud.
Ooh.
And we need to test Unity on VR headsets. So we have Quests in a data center rack.
Oh, I bet that looks awesome.
Continuous integration. So, you know, but those are real reasons that cannot be done anywhere else. And once you name it like that, it's like there were no arguments really. It was just like, okay, how do we collaborate to make sure this has the right funding? But that was done from, I mean, essentially, I'd never had to put that map on paper, but I was doing it in my head, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you've also done some really interesting stuff, like not with reports, but it sounds like you've done it with other interesting artifacts. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so pictures are cool and all, but have you heard about spreadsheets? So
they're so good.
So the situation that we have, so the teams I run, right? We run all the Unity. We have all of the internal tooling that, like I said, make development of this pretty complex piece of software possible. And because it's a very large code base, and like, you know, we're not unique in the world with the type of application, but like fairly unique. This is not an online service. This is an editor that gets deployed to people's desktops for making games, and then it's a runtime that gets deployed to more or less every mobile phone in the world to run those games, right? And so we have some pretty specialized needs here, and some justified specialized tooling. Like, a lot of stuff you can get off the shelf, but sometimes we actually cannot get stuff off the shelf. And it's kind of why people pay us to be their game engine instead of like trying to do this themselves, because we're solving some actually hard problems for people. But so in our teams, we basically have, I don't know, probably over 100 different tools and services that are involved in making this all possible. And when looking at, okay, we know we're not sort of, you know, these are internal tools, right? So it kind of works, and like, you know, but we knew we wanted to level up our kind of operational maturity, like do proper incidents when these tools were down, or like, you know, just understand better. And we ended up essentially needing a map, like to map this problem. But again, I try to not bring the language of mapping because it's too complex for people. And so we actually started in, hey, we as a team, we're responsible for all of these services. Let's make a list of them. So we didn't even start to begin with in like user needs, right? Because this is like the substance, right? People know, okay, we are responsible for, you know, like you're on your picture, version control, you know, build tools, like, you know, the CI systems, like the test farm, like we're responsible for all of these tools and systems. Let's start by making a list of them. That's like level 1 of situational awareness. And this is where trying to do that in a map, like it's almost like one step too far. Trying to do that in a picture, it's like you kind of need a spreadsheet, right? You need a little database, because 100 or so tools is like, it's too much to just keep in your head.
Yeah,
right?
We're gonna need a bigger map.
Yeah, a bigger map or whatever. And actually what you need is a spreadsheet.
Yep.
And so we started by making a list of the tools, and I'm going to share what it actually looks like, this spreadsheet, because you'll see it's basically a map disguised as a spreadsheet. And then our next question was like, what are the different critical paths that we need to make sure are up, right? Without which something stops that shouldn't stop. Like we all sort of vaguely know that we're business critical, but like for what exactly? And now we get to the user needs, right? But we call them critical paths. Okay, so, you know, one critical path is like local development. And now I'm going to actually throw this on the screen, right? So you start to understand how we were doing this. So
Awesome.
one critical path here is like, can I do local development? Can a developer, you know, we have 1,000 plus engineers at Unity working on the engine. If this tool is down or like whatever, can people do local development, right? Can they write code on their machine? And, you know, you can have some different definitions of this, but presumably if I can't check out the source code, it's probably hard for me to do local development, right? And then can we merge code into mainline? And that's where we have our heavy commit stage with like, you know, a huge battery of tests that runs on every batch of PRs. There's a merge queue and there's a set of tooling related to that. And so are those systems available? Because without them, we don't have the confidence to say that this PR with code should go into mainline. So we're essentially halting development then. And then after code has, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just like, so I'm just making sure I'm following along. So on the left-hand side, you've got like each of your services or tools.
Yeah.
And then in the columns, you've got like the functions or the critical paths that depend on those tools. And so you can, that's okay. I'm with you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So here we're basically cross-mapping. So we have these like 4, 5, 6, you know, kind of critical path activities that we do for a business value, right? That we need to make sure are still available. And so, you know, are the CI pipelines available, test and build and so on. We then have a bunch of other tooling for like actually releasing to our customers. So that's like, can we release a build? And then we have a bunch of other toolings around quality processes, like can we reproduce bugs? If we get like bugs on PlayStation, if our like test farm is down, you can't spin up a PlayStation to like verify whether the bug is on PlayStation or not, right? And so we have a bunch of tools and systems, automated sort of last minute release acceptance testing and stuff like that. Like, and we have a bunch of tools that help our QA teams, like test plan tools and stuff like that. You know, test rail, is test rail there or not, right? Without our test plan, you know, we don't have confidence in our builds if we haven't been able to execute on those, right? And then we have some tools for like improving engineering velocity that are around like we bisect regressions, for example. I have a team dedicated to that. When we have regressions, we bisect to figure out what PR did this start in, and that otherwise the regular engineers would have to do that. And so you would add hours and hours of work into their day, right? So here you have the user value of different types in our ecosystem. But again, here we just call them critical paths. And then we say out of all of our crazy service catalog, which services are kind of relevant for what paths? Because very quickly we see here that, something like version control, again, I've given you a cut here of some stuff, but our actual list, is like way longer. Version control kind of underpins more or less all of these. It's maybe not a 5 on all of them, but again, if you can't get like there's data about PRs and stuff like that you need all across, right? So one of the things that immediately stood out from the exercise of doing this was that our, self-hosted sort of version control is where we really need to harden kind of operational maturity and run books and just make sure that this service is available from our team, because if it's not, kind of the whole machinery halts, right?
Yeah.
And so
this feels very I'm so sorry. This feels very important. Like it's imprecise, right? It's not like a perfect value chain with all the little bits and bobs and everything. But compared to what was happening before, this is what you're talking about when you say not so much meta, more like get into the substance.
Yeah,
I love
every
it.
piece of information here is just there's almost no meta, right? And what we get is essentially a value chain for each of these critical paths, depending on which. So if you look at what this exercise looked like, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here because I was just screenshotting out of our actual assessment that is internal information that I can't share. That, for certain of these lanes, you have more services that are involved than others, right? So you get a little in this sheet, as I said, this sheet map that's masquerading as a spreadsheet, we actually get multiple value chains mapped out with a lot of granularity. And here comes the next reason to do this in a sheet. Aside from mapping, what component, what dependency value chain we have here, we are, for every service here, we have in total, I counted 31 different other factors that are differences that can make a difference when it comes to what we might want to do here. And so this is this amount of metadata, for each service, we're asking ourselves, a number of basic questions. It's is this a third-party tool? Is it open source? Is it internally built? Who's responsible for it? Who is the customer? What kind of uptime is required? Bus factor is not a pleasant word, right? But how many developers are actually able to change this tool at the moment? Do we even have agency here, or is it sitting on a shelf from something old, right? Is there developer documentation? No, unknown, third party, yes, internal, right? Where is the developer documentation? Do we have reference documentation? Do we have run books? Do we, what kind of observability tooling do we use on this? And because we have a large catalog of internal tools built by different teams at different times and different orgs, 5 reorgs later, someone's using this stack from this other team, someone's using something homegrown, someone's using whatever, right? And essentially we were lacking situational awareness about these dimensions. And the power, if you will, now I'm starting to pitch hey, map in spreadsheets, but the power here, of course, is that all of these, again, 31 different dimensions that we found value in documenting for each of our services. How the hell do you fit that in a map picture? And the answer is you don't, right? Yeah. And so many of these factors are potentially relevant for what we would want to do, or they're a meaningful part of the situational awareness that we needed about our environment and our landscape. And so that, I think, is one of the insights that I have come out with, which is that the picture is very quickly becomes very limiting, because you can really only, in the visual Wardley mapping format, you can really only document a few different aspects. And of course, they're really valuable because the language we have for mapping is about the movements in the landscape. So it's the right sort of language for that type of mapping, but I'm not sure it's the right language or the right granularity or like method, like the extensibility in data for creating that basic shared situational awareness about many of the factors that matter. And I think that there's a lot more people who might be able to get their organization to do a list of the critical things we have in our scope, and then start to document meaningful information about those things, again, which you can do asynchronously. The whole big sheet we have is, you know, services in there are kept by like 20 or so different teams. So obviously we didn't get all together in a session and did this live, because why on earth would we, right? But we framed this sheet, we created it, and we created the dimensions, and then we got each team to basically put their stuff in here. And again, immediately from this awareness, we can discuss all kinds of stuff. Like once we start to see, like, where do people have their documentation? We can go like, oh, our documentation is in 7 different places. That doesn't seem good. Should we maybe do something about that? Right?
Huh.
And all the way to like, you know, what kind of disaster recovery, like where do you post status if you have incidents? Do you use our internal incident management bot? Like, yes, no, some teams did, some teams did not, and so on. So this, you know, is it a CLI tool? Is that you could just see here, right? I mean, any dimensions you need, anything that's like a difference that will make a difference for how you might want to act. And this has become really powerful for me to do this in spreadsheets because I don't need to talk about mapping, the mapping parts, also the maturity. And you see here, some of this, is this a third-party tool, for example? Some of those maturity, or like, should we take this off the shelf or not? You can have those conversations over this column, right? It's like, just you can have that discussion there. It's like, okay, we have a home built CI system at Unity, for example, and probably we wouldn't do that again today, but now we have it. It gives us an environment where developers working in Unity can also write all of their CI stuff in C#, which is what you know most of Unity development is done in. And so now it's like, if we would want to swap it out, we would essentially burden every developer with probably learning a new stack for how to write CI jobs, right? And so, but those discussions we can kind of have there. So this for me has become a way to sort of bring a lot of like the tools and thoughts from mapping, but I have had to sort of, I haven't had to convince anyone of anything here. And really you have the value chains here, and then you have a number of other factors from mapping go into specific columns, or the columns themselves can sort of trigger those discussions. And basically after making this sheet, we have this amazing new situational, like shared situational awareness across, you know, especially our leadership team, but also the other teams, because you're in this sheet and you go like, oh, now I actually know all the stuff we have in other parts of the org without having to do some cumbersome town halls or like hope for ambient awareness or like unsiloing, because people being in here, they can go just like, oh, you also have a Slack bot. Like, why do we have 5 different Slack bots across our tooling landscape? Maybe we should help each other, or like standardize on one, or whatever. And so basically, yeah, I think for a lot of stuff, you have some real benefits from working in spreadsheets here. With the mapping theory in your own head, then you actually have some strong benefits here in terms of especially this being able to add as many dimensions as you like. And that's a tool for really focusing on like your domain, because every column here is like a meaningful category for us and our team. There's zero theory here, right? Like, again, and it's not that the theory is bad, right? But it's just like, it's not needed here in a way. The theory went into why we made this spreadsheet in the first place, to create shared situational awareness and create the understanding of our value chain. that was the spark of why did we make this sheet. That's where the theory came from mapping, right? But then the actual work with this, nobody had to know about mapping at all.
Yeah. I think
So
what's really cool about
spreadsheet
this
is my mapping hack.
yes. I think it's so cool because it also like reveals how influence works with this. Like one of the things Simon has written about is spend control. And it's like you force the organization to map by saying you can't launch any projects above this dollar threshold unless you show me a map. And like it's really good for like getting people to map, I guess, but like also it creates that kind of labor distribution of having all these different people mapping and things like that. That's one way of doing it. There are other ways. And this is interesting because you anchored it to something people understand, spreadsheets, columns, rows, and you kind of sneakily got them to do mapping like things. And yeah, it's imprecise. Yeah, it's going to miss some stuff. But like, what were they doing before? And what are they doing now? And every like column is another conversation that they can go have. Every row is another place in the things that we care about, the domains that we care about. I think that's really important and powerful. There's some interesting questions that are popping up too. Like Angie had one around how do you ensure that the discussion stays at a relatively even level of granularity? Like it seems like you talked about services. Any thoughts on that?
I think you don't actually, because what I have found in every valuable exercise here is that it's situation specific. What's a black box and what you need to explode. So certain things usually don't matter or don't really come into the change. It might be like in a mapping sense, it might be lower parts of the map. Like if something is commodity for you, you don't care how it's made, right? And very often in your landscape, you have stuff where it's like it needs to be in the picture, but it's one component that hides like a giant set of stuff underneath it. And very, very often, if we do make pictures, so what we also do a lot in my practice is we also make pictures, right? Very seldom we make proper maps, but usually we make pictures that are essentially the whiteboard you would draw if you were going to discuss something, and then we just make it in a Miro or something so that you have all the moving parts that matter. And what very often happens in these is that some parts of that picture are way more detailed than others because that's where the detail matters. And then other parts you can just black box. So I would say that trying to get things to the same level of granularity is like a sort of, it should not be the goal. Because, and the other thing that we do all the time is that thinking of these as temporary artifacts. For me, I always think that the first purpose is to create that shared situational awareness. Once you've created that, the value of maintaining the artifact is often quite low. But you have this trap where especially engineers will often feel like if we're making a picture, it has to be complete and accurate, and who's going to maintain it? And I think there is a freedom in saying nobody's going to maintain it. This is just a snapshot we're making now, so we can make some good decisions in our current situation. And so our operational maturity spreadsheet here, we're essentially going to throw it away. I mean, we'll probably maintain it for a little while, but we already got, I was going to show you on the screen, right? This black line that you see here is basically, we sorted the sheet by a sort of calculated criticality score, and then obviously inspected the result. And then we drew this line and said the 13 things above the line are where we're going to invest to get them to a certain level of maturity when it comes to observability, incident practices, run books. Like, we're going to make sure that all of these that are our most critical internal services are going to be at least at that standard. And the rest of the 70, they're either in like okay shape, or they're supporting a smaller, like a thinner slice use case, or like we're sort of okay with leaving them be for now. Once we've made that decision, like we'll probably revisit this sheet at some point because there's some useful stuff in there. We might revisit it because we're focusing on something else, like the documentation aspect, for example, that I mentioned before. But you know, so this is throw it away, or like tell people that it's going to be thrown away, or think about it like that it's like it's a moment in time, so it doesn't need to be a permanent artifact. And that also releases the tension around making sure it's super correct, or like documenting every aspect. Often maps, like sometimes they're mistaken for architecture diagrams of the technology, because they are a little bit like that, right? The value chain is kind of in a technical system. It is a little bit like some of the dependency chain is kind of the architecture diagram. But I tried off to remove the discussion from that by saying, no, we're trying to map our current landscape. We're trying to give ourselves enough information that we have that shared situational awareness. Once we have that, to the point of like, then we'll take orders from the situation.
I think it's interesting to, like, I'm of two minds with the disposable maps thing, because like I actually like 100% agree. We don't want people getting stuck on the, well, creating more meta work around an artifact, and every other artifact in the organization has gone what way, right? Every architecture diagram, every once in a while someone prints out the 4-foot long piece of paper and puts it on the wall. It's the architecture diagram. Like, we don't want that happening to our maps, unless, and I think maps are things that evolve too. And in a lot of cases, if we're dealing with uncertainty, I think the maps need to die and come back, and die and come back, and die and come back, and eventually you start seeing something that could live for a little bit longer. I think that's interesting. I want to make sure that we
questions in the Q&A pod here.
Yeah, good call.
So I'll take the first one here. With so many tools, I guess that's for our situation at Unity. Any advice on which ones are helpful and which ones to sunset using maps? Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of questions that we've been able to answer, right? And we actually don't have any duplication at the moment, more or less, or we have it in one or two places, but we found that. In most cases, it turned out that on paper it was duplication, but the use cases were different enough that it was actually justified duplication. It wasn't the same. Like, just because it was a CI system, like we have Jenkins in one place and the whole homegrown in another, and it wasn't like a disastrous duplication. It was turned out to be fine. All right. And the moving effort would have been so low value that it just wasn't a good idea to do. So I think the sunsetting, we've had if I understand the question correctly, that's we've had a lot of help in those types of discussions by, again, making that sheet, which is a map, which is a sheet, because again, you can make columns for any of these aspects, right?
Yeah. And like, it's all about focus too. Like, you only have so much organizational capacity. Where are you going to put it? If you got 1,000 things and only 7 of them are really, really, really important, like, you can kind of sort of by implication help with the focus, not on the rest of the stuff. Cool. I see one from Matthew here. I'm relatively inexperienced with mapping, although I've definitely found it more than slightly useful. Well, that's good. One thing I've found is that my maps tend to be inwards looking, maybe natural if you're starting to work from the visible stuff and work downwards. Is there a trick to using maps to look outwards? I love this question because the answer is yes. And I think the answer has to do with reading. One of the tricks that I do whenever I'm working with a consulting client is I'm entering usually a domain that I've never seen before. And so I'll take the company and I'll throw it into Google News or some other like website search, and I'll try to learn as much as I can about what's going on in this industry for this company. What are the earnings reports say? They're usually beat reporters who write things about that industry, who they're just focused on it. Like, what do they say? And what I find from that is like I start seeing terms that keep popping up over and over again. I start learning vocabulary that I didn't know. And I start like making a map of the market level view of things, which is slightly weirder and different than the inward looking version of things. Sometimes I have a slide where I kind of say like maps can be made at 3 levels. There's the market level, like what's going on out there, who are all the actors, what are they doing, what are their needs, how do they conflict with the people who are being served needs, all that fun stuff. There's the inward looking version of things, which is more operational, like how does this organization work, how does this team work, and then like you can really zoom in on like how does this piece of functionality in the code base work, and it's like market level, operational level, labor level. I like kind of looking at those different kind of levels of things. So, but reading is a really good way to sort of open up your view, especially looking at competitors and things like that. I see there's a second part of this question. There was an AI session and the introduction of the
Then,
internet. Yeah,
sorry, Jen. Just a reminder, we're wrapping up in like
5 minutes.
5 minutes. We can
Yeah,
extend for another 5, I guess. So if we want to take 10 minutes, that should be fine.
all
I
good.
already checked with the VFairs on that one.
Yeah, I think we can probably end on time unless I'm missing something.
Okay.
But so just checking here, there was an AI session. This other part of Matthew's question here. The introduction of the internet led to the introduction of higher levels of visibility. Is this kind of thing only possible retrospectively, or can we use maps to try and see or originate these higher order things? That one's hard. Andie, do you have any thoughts on that one? I might need to noodle on this a little bit. So I do have a weird maybe answer to this, and I think visibility is made up.
Yeah. There's a more concrete question from Barry as well that we maybe take the AI and visibility debate in a Slack channel or but there's a more concrete question here around basically have we used Wardley mapping to drive change in team structures or responsibilities or lines of communication? And I would say yes and no. I would say this type of exercise that I was sharing about did lead to a bunch of those discussions, and the thinking. I think we're working a lot with ownership at the moment, like code ownership and sort of mapping out responsibilities and then this monolithic code base, because in the monolith you have to say who owns what. It's not just like who owns this repo. Well, the repo is ginormous, so like who owns this part of the code, right? Who's responsible for that? And so I would say yes, but again, kind of hiding a mapping thinking. I'm thinking a lot about like the dependencies for those teams who are actually able to change the code. Like, do they have what they need? And where are they overloaded and so on? It's like they depend on having bandwidth. Right now we have change that we need to do around our automated testing, where we have a lot of legacy situation that teams kind of need to address, but they lack time, like approved time to work on it. Why do they lack that? Well, it's because we don't have alignment at a leadership level about what's the ROI on that type of work. So now I'm working that problem. So it's all, again, the theory of Wardley mapping behind the scenes, but we're not necessarily using explicit Wardley mapping words or even explicit Wardley maps, which is, I guess, a little fascinating. But I hopefully it can be some kind of encouraging for people that you can actually make a lot of change in your organization without anyone knowing that it's Wardley maps. And that doesn't mean we should hide it like it's but I think that traction problem it's a real tall order, like we talked about in the beginning, to try to convince someone of the theory before they've seen any value from it, and rather to start to bring that value and that thinking, and then people might get curious and you might then be able to be more refined with it as people get interested and want to come along.
Yeah, I think as soon as you name the thing, a bunch of people bristle and they want to fight you. And it's really interesting to just help like the smart people who want to make change just decide what they want and then fight for it. All right. Jen, I know you've got to go. You might already be gone. I don't know. But thank you for setting us up and helping us with all the fun technical stuff earlier. Thanks to the VFairs folks and Andie.
I'm still here.
Excellent.
But yeah,
Thanks everyone
we have
for
to be wrapping up soon, according to the fair. So
Excellent.
thank both for that great session, and thanks to everyone for joining. But I'll let you continue.
That's great. And Andie, thank you so much. Like this has been a lot of fun. I loved thinking about this stuff with you. And where can folks find more about you? And where can they find you on the internet?
just search my name and you'll find me. I think that's the easiest
Yep.
way. It's a
Same.
really unique name. So find us on the internet, reach out if you want to chat about this stuff, and yeah, see you in the rest of the conference. Thanks everyone for listening today, and thanks Ben for doing this with me. It's just a pleasure.
Thanks everybody. Have a lovely day.
Reminder to everyone: the closing keynote is at 6 p.m. and the fireside chat with Simon and a few more people will be at 7 p.m. So
I can't
hope
wait.
to see you there. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks everybody.